The British political landscape has been shaken to its core. The ruling is out, and it could alter the balance of power in Westminster in ways no one saw coming. The Lady Chief Justice has spoken, and her words carry the weight of a political earthquake. Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, stands accused of something that strikes at the very foundation of democracy, abusing her power to manipulate the political system. This is not just another scandal. This is not the usual political mudslinging. This is a direct legal challenge to the integrity of one of the highest-ranking officials in the country. The accusations? That Rayner used her influence to suppress the rise of Reform UK, the insurgent party that has been gaining ground against the traditional Labour and Conservative duopoly. And now, the judiciary has intervened, making it clear that such interference will not be tolerated. But think about what this means. For the courts to step in at this level, for the most senior judge in England and Wales to publicly rebuke a sitting Deputy Prime Minister, this is not normal. This is extraordinary. The judiciary rarely, if ever, intervenes in political affairs unless the situation is so egregious, so blatant, that it cannot be ignored. And yet here we are. The verdict is clear. The actions of Angela Rayner, and by extension, the Labour Party, have gone too far. So what exactly did Rayner do? The allegations point to a systematic effort to block Reform UK from gaining traction. Insiders reveal a pattern of procedural loopholes being exploited, parliamentary manoeuvres being used to sideline opposition voices, and backroom pressure being applied to ensure that Reform UK remained politically neutered. Witness testimonies, internal party leaks, and even confidential documents suggest that Labour saw Reform UK as a threat and decided to use every available tool, not to compete, but to silence. Let's not sugarcoat this. If true, this is political suppression of the highest order. This is an abuse of power that undermines the very idea of democracy. Labour, the party that claims to be the voice of the people, now finds itself accused of actively working to silence those same people. And the timing could not be worse for them. With a general election on the horizon, Labour should be solidifying its position, preparing to take on the Tories in what was expected to be a decisive campaign. Instead, they are in full-blown crisis mode, desperately trying to contain the fallout. But let's not forget who stands to benefit from this. Reform UK, long dismissed by the establishment as a fringe movement, now has undeniable proof, straight from the courts, that the system was rigged against them. This is exactly the kind of ammunition they needed to galvanise their base, to claim that the old political elites will stop at nothing to maintain their grip on power. Nigel Farage and other leading figures in the party are already calling for a full parliamentary inquiry, demanding that Rayner be held accountable. And frankly, can you blame them? The response from Labour has been as predictable as it is desperate. Senior officials are rushing to defend Rayner, dismissing the ruling as a misunderstanding of parliamentary processes. They insist that everything she did was within the bounds of political strategy. But behind closed doors, the panic is real. There are whispers that this could cost Labour not just the election, but their credibility as a party committed to fairness and democratic values. Internal divisions are surfacing. Some Labour insiders believe that Rayner should resign to minimise the damage. Others argue that stepping down would be an admission of guilt and a catastrophic victory for their opponents. And then there's Keir Starmer. What does this mean for his leadership? He now faces an impossible decision. Does he stand by his Deputy Prime Minister and risk dragging the entire party down with her? Or does he cut her loose in a desperate attempt to salvage Labour's image? Either way, the consequences are severe. If Starmer distances himself from Rayner, he looks weak, disloyal, and incapable of controlling his own party. If he defends her, he ties himself directly to a scandal that could explode into something even bigger. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party is watching from the sidelines, weighing its next move. The Tories know that Labour's implosion gives them breathing room, but they are also treading carefully. Because here's the uncomfortable truth for them. If the judiciary is now willing to intervene in cases of political overreach, who's to say they won't be next? Some Tory MPs are already warning that this ruling sets a dangerous precedent. If Labour is being scrutinised today, could the Conservatives face the same fate tomorrow? The media is in a frenzy, and public opinion is divided. Reform UK supporters see this as validation, proof that their warnings about political corruption were justified. Social media is ablaze with discussions, with hashtags like #Rayner exposed and #Labour corruption trending as voters express their outrage. But Labour loyalists see this as a politically motivated attack, an attempt to sabotage the party ahead of the election. And yet, one unavoidable question lingers. If a senior political figure like Rayner is capable of manipulating the system to suppress opposition, how deep does this corruption go? Is she merely the fall person for a much larger network of influence within Labour? Could this be part of a broader strategy orchestrated at the highest levels of the party? And if so, who else knew? Who else was involved? This is more than just a political scandal. This is about the very nature of British democracy. Can politicians continue to operate in the shadows, using their power to shut down opposition? Or has the judiciary just signaled the beginning of a new era? One where no politician, no matter how powerful, is above scrutiny. For Angela Rayner, the walls are closing in. The calls for her resignation are growing louder. The pressure is mounting. If further investigations uncover more evidence, she could face serious legal repercussions. And if she falls, it won't just be her career that's over. Labour itself could be facing a reckoning unlike anything it has seen in modern history. But this is far from over. The next few weeks could redefine British politics. Will Labour manage to contain the crisis? Or will Reform UK ride this wave to a historic breakthrough? Will Starmer sacrifice Rayner to protect himself? Or will he stand by her until the bitter end? And what about the courts? Will this ruling embolden further judicial scrutiny into the actions of politicians across the spectrum? One thing is certain: Westminster is in chaos. The establishment is in turmoil. The battle lines have been drawn, and the stakes have never been higher. This is not just about Angela Rayner. This is about power, corruption, and the future of Britain itself. The question now is, who will emerge victorious? The ruling has landed like a political bombshell, sending shockwaves through Westminster and beyond. The Lady Chief Justice, the highest legal authority in England and Wales, has spoken, and her words are damning. This is not some minor reprimand or a vague slap on the wrist. This is a direct legal challenge to the very foundations of how Labour has operated under Angela Rayner's leadership. The verdict: that she abused her position, manipulated the system, and actively worked to stifle political opposition. But let's be clear, this is not just about Angela Rayner. This ruling has sent a seismic message to the entire political establishment. The days of unchecked power may be coming to an end. For the judiciary to step in at this level, for a judge of such standing to issue such a public rebuke, means one thing: what happened behind closed doors at Labour HQ was so blatant, so egregious, that it could no longer be ignored. The details of the accusations are chilling. We are talking about systematic efforts to block Reform UK's rise, not by fair competition, not by winning the battle of ideas, but by procedural sabotage. Loopholes were exploited. Parliamentary mechanisms were twisted beyond recognition. Pressure was applied behind the scenes to shut down an emerging political force. And why? Because Reform UK dared to challenge the status quo. Because they represented a threat to the old establishment, a challenge to the cosy Labour Conservative duopoly that has dominated British politics for decades. And now, Labour has been caught. This is not some fringe conspiracy theory. This is not political rhetoric from a rival party trying to score cheap points. This is the judiciary, an institution that historically avoids intervening in politics, coming forward and saying, enough. The interference was real. The abuse of power was real. And Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, was at the centre of it all. Labour's response? Predictable. The party machine has gone into full crisis mode, desperately spinning this as nothing more than a misunderstanding of political processes. Senior figures are rushing to Rayner's defence, insisting that all she did was engage in strategic governance, whatever that means. But behind the scenes, the panic is palpable. This isn't just another scandal. This isn't some passing controversy that will disappear in a few news cycles. This is a crisis that strikes at the heart of Labour's credibility. A party that claims to stand for democracy, fairness, and the will of the people has now been exposed for actively working against those very principles. The hypocrisy is staggering. And it's no surprise that Reform UK is seizing the moment. Nigel Farage and other Reform UK leaders have wasted no time in using this ruling as proof of what they've been saying all along, that the system is rigged, that the establishment will stop at nothing to suppress its challengers, that the political elite has been pulling the strings behind the scenes to maintain its grip on power. And now, they have the receipts. They're calling for an immediate parliamentary inquiry. They're demanding that Angela Rayner step down. And frankly, how can anyone argue against that? A sitting Deputy Prime Minister accused of abusing power to silence political opposition. How is that remotely acceptable in a democracy? If this had happened in another country, if a political leader in, say, Russia or China had been exposed for using government mechanisms to block a rising opposition party, British politicians would be the first to call it authoritarianism. But when it happens in the UK, we're supposed to look the other way. The stakes for Labour could not be higher. With an election looming, this scandal could derail their entire campaign. And then there's Keir Starmer, Labour's leader, now trapped in an impossible position. If he stands by Rayner, he risks being seen as complicit in the abuse of power. If he throws her under the bus, he risks alienating Labour loyalists who see this as a politically motivated attack. Either way, his leadership is now under intense scrutiny. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party is watching from the sidelines, playing a delicate balancing act. They know that Labour's crisis is an opportunity, but they also recognise the dangers of this ruling. Because if the judiciary is now willing to intervene in cases of political overreach, who's next? Could Tory officials face similar scrutiny? Could their own past actions be dragged into the spotlight? And then there's the public reaction, divided, angry, and deeply distrustful of the entire system. Reform UK supporters see this as vindication. Labour loyalists see it as a smear campaign. But for many ordinary voters, this just confirms what they've long suspected, that the political class plays by its own rules, that the so-called democratic system is little more than a carefully managed illusion, and that real change is virtually impossible when those in power will do anything to hold on to it. And let's not forget the role of the media. Right now, headlines are exploding with speculation. Will Rayner be forced to resign? Will criminal charges follow? How deep does this scandal really go? And most importantly, who else knew? Because let's be honest, Angela Rayner did not act alone. No Deputy Prime Minister operates in a vacuum. If Labour really did engage in a coordinated effort to suppress Reform UK, then other senior figures must have been involved. Could this lead to more resignations? More investigations? Could we be looking at the unravelling of Labour's top leadership just months before a general election? And if that happens, what then? Does Reform UK capitalise on the chaos and emerge stronger than ever? Do the Conservatives use this as a weapon to crush Labour once and for all? Or do we descend into a level of political infighting so toxic that it damages trust in the entire system beyond repair? One thing is certain, this is not going away. Angela Rayner's political survival is now hanging by a thread. The next few days will determine whether she clings to power or falls spectacularly from grace. The pressure is mounting, the scrutiny is relentless, and if Labour cannot contain the fallout, the consequences will be devastating. This ruling is more than just a legal decision. It is a moment of reckoning. A line in the sand. A signal that perhaps, for the first time in years, those in power might actually be held accountable. But will justice truly be served? Or will Labour and the political elite find a way to wriggle out of yet another scandal, leaving the public disillusioned and democracy weaker than ever? Westminster is in chaos. The establishment is panicking. And the fight for Britain's political future has just begun. Westminster is in turmoil, and the Labour Party is on the brink of an implosion. Angela Rayner, once seen as Labour's warrior, bold, relentless, unafraid, now finds herself at the centre of a scandal so severe that it threatens to tear the party apart. The ruling against her has done more than just cast doubt on her leadership. It has triggered a full-scale crisis that could derail Labour's grip on power just as they were preparing for what should have been a triumphant election campaign. The question now is, can Labour survive this political earthquake, or is this the beginning of its downfall? The accusations against Rayner are not just damaging, they are devastating. We are not talking about a minor breach of protocol, a poorly worded email, or an unfortunate comment taken out of context. No, this is about the systematic suppression of political opposition. This is about an alleged abuse of power so blatant that the courts had no choice but to step in. And let's be clear, for the judiciary to intervene in a political affair of this magnitude is almost unheard of. It signals that something truly extraordinary has taken place, something that could not be ignored. What makes this even more shocking is the sheer arrogance with which Labour appears to have operated. If these allegations are true, then Rayner and those around her did not just bend the rules, they shattered them. The reports suggest that Reform UK was not simply outmanoeuvred politically but deliberately obstructed through parliamentary loopholes, procedural blockages, and behind-the-scenes pressure to prevent them from gaining any real momentum. In other words, Labour was not content to defeat Reform UK at the ballot box. Instead, they allegedly sought to ensure that they never even had the chance to compete on a level playing field. And now that they have been caught, the panic inside Labour is undeniable. Senior officials are scrambling to contain the fallout, issuing vague statements defending Rayner while simultaneously trying to distance themselves from her actions. The narrative they are pushing? That this is nothing more than routine political strategy, that Rayner's actions were simply part of how modern politics works. But the public isn't buying it. And why should they? If a government is willing to use its influence to suppress opposition today, what's stopping it from doing something even worse tomorrow? The hypocrisy is staggering. Labour has always positioned itself as the party of democracy, fairness, and justice, the defenders of the common people against the excesses of the elite. And yet, here they are, accused of using the very tools of government to crush an emerging opposition party before it could pose a serious threat. This isn't just an attack on Reform UK. It's an attack on the principles of fair competition, on the idea that in a democracy, the people should be the ones who decide who governs, not politicians pulling strings in backroom deals. Reform UK, unsurprisingly, is treating this as a gift from the political gods. Nigel Farage and his allies are not just condemning Rayner, they are seizing the moment, using this scandal to paint themselves as the victims of a corrupt system rigged against them. And can you blame them? This ruling plays perfectly into their narrative. For years, Reform UK has positioned itself as the anti-establishment force, the party that dares to challenge the cosy cartel of Labour and the Conservatives. Now, they have tangible proof that they were deliberately suppressed. The result? A surge of anger, frustration, and political energy that could propel Reform UK into the mainstream like never before. Their supporters see this ruling as confirmation of everything they have been saying, that the political elite in this country will do anything, to maintain their grip on power. And they are furious. Social media is ablaze with outrage, with hashtags like #LabourCorruption and #RaynerExposed trending as more and more people demand accountability. The frustration is no longer just coming from die-hard Reform UK supporters. It's spreading to disillusioned voters across the political spectrum who are sick of feeling manipulated and ignored. And then there's Keir Starmer, Labour's leader, now caught in the most impossible position of his career. He has two options, and both are disastrous. If he stands by Rayner, he ties himself and the entire Labour Party to the scandal, allowing the Conservatives and Reform UK to frame Labour as an organisation willing to cheat its way to power. But if he distances himself from her, or worse, forces her to resign, he risks tearing his own party apart just months before a general election. There is no easy way out. And let's not pretend that the Conservatives aren't taking full advantage of this chaos. While the Tories have had their fair share of scandals, they know a golden opportunity when they see one. Their MPs are already calling for a full parliamentary inquiry, demanding that Labour answer for its actions. Some are even suggesting that Rayner should be suspended from Parliament while investigations continue. And why wouldn't they push for that? This is their chance to weaken Labour when it matters most. But the real danger for Labour isn't just the immediate fallout from this scandal, it's what happens next. Because if the courts have ruled against Rayner today, what's stopping further investigations from uncovering even more wrongdoing tomorrow? If this was a coordinated effort within Labour, who else was involved? Who else knew? Are we looking at a scandal that could stretch beyond Rayner and implicate other senior figures in the party? And if so, what does that mean for the next election? Will this controversy cost Labour the support they need to defeat the Conservatives? Could this ruling give Reform UK the breakthrough they've been waiting for? Could we be on the verge of witnessing the biggest shake-up in British politics in decades? This is no longer just about Angela Rayner. This is about Labour's survival. This is about the integrity of British democracy. This is about whether the political elite can continue to operate with impunity, bending the rules in their favor while expecting the public to simply accept it. The public is watching, and they are angry. Rayner's options are running out. Her defiant public statements insisting that she has done nothing wrong may satisfy her most loyal supporters, but they do nothing to calm the growing storm around her. If more evidence emerges, if more insiders come forward with details of how Reform UK was targeted, her position will become untenable. And if she falls, the impact will be catastrophic for Labour. The clock is ticking. The pressure is mounting. And the battle lines have been drawn. Westminster is in crisis, and the road ahead is uncertain. Will Labour be able to contain the damage? Will Reform UK rise from this scandal stronger than ever? Will this ruling be the beginning of a deeper reckoning for British politics? One thing is certain, the game has changed. And there is no going back. The fallout from this scandal is reaching a fever pitch, and there's no sign of it slowing down. The media has latched onto the story like a pack of wolves, dissecting every development, every statement, every desperate attempt by Labour to contain the damage. Angela Rayner, once one of the most powerful figures in the party, now finds herself cornered, fighting for her political survival as questions loom over her future. The ruling against her was damning, the accusations severe. This isn't just about a minor lapse in judgment, this is about the very integrity of British democracy. And yet, despite the weight of the allegations, Rayner refuses to step down. Her strategy: deny, deflect, and attack. In public statements, she has dismissed the court's ruling as an overreach, accusing her critics of political opportunism and claiming that this is nothing more than a coordinated effort to take her down. But is anyone really buying it? The evidence presented in court was enough for the judiciary, the very institution designed to remain above politics, to intervene. That alone speaks volumes. This wasn't some partisan attack from a rival party. This was a legal judgment that sent shockwaves through Westminster. So, what happens now? Will Rayner cling to power, hoping to outlast the media storm? Or will the pressure from within her own party become unbearable? The longer this drags on, the more it weakens Labour as a whole. Keir Starmer knows this. He understands the optics. Having his deputy mired in a scandal of this magnitude just months before an election is a political disaster. But does he have the backbone to act? Or will he wait, hoping that the public will move on before he's forced to make a decision? Meanwhile, Reform UK is capitalising on every moment of this. They have turned this controversy into a war cry, an example of everything they've been saying for years, that the political elite will do anything to maintain their grip on power. And now, thanks to this ruling, they have the proof to back up their claims. Nigel Farage and his allies are demanding more than just Rayner's resignation. They want a full parliamentary investigation into Labour's conduct. And frankly, who could blame them? The implications of this case go far beyond Rayner herself. If Labour truly did engage in a coordinated effort to block Reform UK's rise, then who else was involved? Was this just the work of one rogue operator? Or is there a broader network of influence at play? And if these tactics were used against Reform UK, what's to say they haven't been used against other political threats in the past? The public deserves answers, but will they get them? Or will this all be quietly swept under the rug, buried under bureaucratic red tape until people lose interest? That, of course, is what Labour is desperately hoping for. Behind the scenes, the party's crisis management team is working overtime, crafting narratives to distract from the scandal, trying to shift the conversation onto safer ground. Their goal is simple: survive. If they can weather the immediate storm, if they can stall long enough, they believe the news cycle will eventually move on. But will it? Or is this just the beginning of a deeper reckoning? The pressure is mounting, not just on Rayner but on the entire Labour leadership. The party faithful may be standing by her for now, but how long will that last? The cracks are already beginning to show. Senior figures are reportedly divided, with some arguing that she must go to protect the party, while others fear that forcing her out would be an admission of guilt. The infighting is growing, and with each passing day, the sense of panic inside Labour HQ intensifies. Meanwhile, the Conservatives are playing a careful game. On one hand, they are enjoying watching their main opposition implode. On the other, They are acutely aware that if the judiciary is willing to intervene in cases of political overreach now, there's no guarantee that future rulings won't target them next. Rishi Sunak's government is balancing on a knife's edge, unsure of whether to press the attack or keep their distance. If they push too hard, they risk drawing attention to their own questionable practices. But if they stay too quiet, they miss the opportunity to capitalize on Labour's crisis. And then there's the public, watching this circus unfold with a mixture of outrage and exhaustion. People are tired of the endless corruption, tired of the scandals, tired of politicians treating democracy like their personal playground. This ruling has confirmed the worst fears of many, that the system is rigged, that those in power will always find ways to suppress opposition, and that real change is almost impossible when the establishment controls the rules of the game. But could this be a turning point? Could this be the moment when the public finally says enough is enough? The growing support for Reform UK suggests that something is shifting. Their base is energised like never before, their message amplified by this controversy. If Labour isn't careful, they could find themselves bleeding support not just to the Tories, but to a movement that is openly challenging the entire political order. Rayner's fate now hangs in the balance. Will she double down, refusing to step aside no matter the cost? Or will the weight of the scandal force her resignation? If she goes, does that stabilise Labour, or does it expose even deeper fractures within the party? And if she stays, can the party survive the onslaught of scrutiny that is sure to follow? And what of the legal ramifications? The accusations against Rayner are serious, far more serious than mere political missteps. If further investigations uncover more evidence, could we see criminal charges? Could this lead to a broader inquiry into Labour's practices? And if that happens, how many others could be dragged down with her? One thing is certain, this is no ordinary controversy. This is a battle for political survival, and the outcome will shape the future of British politics. If Labour weathers this storm, it will only be after a brutal fight. But if they fall, if Rayner is forced out, if further investigations rip open the seams of the party's inner workings, then this could be the beginning of a political shift unlike anything we've seen in modern times. Westminster is on edge. The balance of power is shifting, and no one knows what happens next.